The C-SPAN networks bring you long-form public affairs programming from the nation's capital and are a public service of your television provider. C-SPAN, created by cable.
This week on Q&A, Phyllis Fong, Agriculture Department Inspector General and Chair of the Council of the Inspectors General on Integrity and Efficiency.
Phyllis Fong, what is an Inspector General?
An Inspector General is a public official whose responsibility it is to review the operations of that Inspector General's agency to make sure that programs are delivered effectively and with integrity.
What does your background have to be?
Well, the statute that created Inspectors General says that IGs need to have demonstrated expertise in a number of professions, any one of them, auditing, investigations, law enforcement, public management, and above all, be people of integrity.
How long have you been the Inspector General for the Agriculture Department?
Since December of 2002.
How would you describe this specific job at Agriculture?
Well, at Agriculture, my job as the IG is to oversee the operations of all of USDA's programs to make sure that they are being delivered as effectively as possible. And so what that means on a day-to-day basis is that we, in the IG's office, conduct audits to make sure that programs are running effectively, that improper payments are not going out the door. And we also conduct investigations whenever there are allegations of wrongdoing in a program, either by a department employee or by a person who is receiving benefits. It is our jurisdiction to run investigations of those kinds of activities.
How long have you been there?
Since 2002.
Who appointed you?
Oh, the president. I believe it was President George Bush appointed me to the agriculture position.
So what kind of autonomy do you have?
Well, IGs, as you know, by statute, are considered to be officials who must operate independently. What that means is that although we are located within our own agencies and departments, we are under the general supervision of the Secretary of Agriculture, we have professional independence to exercise our judgment as to what issues need to be looked at, how we're going to go about looking at them, and ultimately what we report to Congress and the President and the Secretary.
How many people work for you?
Currently, we have about 530 employees at USDA IG.
And where are they located?
Well, our staff is located around the country. We have a large presence in Washington, D.C., as you might guess. We also have a large presence in the major federal cities around the country: Chicago, Atlanta, California, San Francisco Bay Area, Texas, and Kansas City.
What's the most obvious thing that you do that the public might not know about?
In terms of what we do, my sense is that the public has a very good grasp of what it means to do an investigation of potential wrongdoing. People seem to understand that if you've got somebody who may be accused of engaging in fraud, that the IG will have the jurisdiction to pursue that. I think what the public may not be as informed on or not be as aware of is the kinds of audits that we do vis-a-vis our department programs in terms of our responsibility to go in, to look at how the department is delivering its programs, how it's, for example, providing farm subsidy payments to farmers. Is the department doing that as effectively as it can? And the questions that we ask are, how do you deliver those programs? Can you do them better?
Okay, the president appoints you.
Yes.
Did the Senate have to approve you?
In my current position, that's correct. The Senate did confirm me.
How many inspectors general are there in the government, the federal government?
Well, currently we have 73 federal inspectors general. 5 or 6 of them are legislative branch agency inspectors general, and they are appointed by their agency head. Of the executive branch IGs, about half are appointed by the President and confirmed by the Senate. The other half are appointed by their agency heads.
Who do you answer to?
That's a very good question. Under the statute that created us, we answered to both our agency head and to Congress. We have a dual responsibility.
What happens if you do something that your agency head doesn't like?
Well, as you can imagine, Inspector General reports often contain recommendations to improve agency operations. Sometimes agency heads may not agree with recommendations. Program officials may say, we don't agree with the premise, or we don't agree with the proposed corrective action. Certainly there's lots of room for reasonable minds to disagree as to what the best way forward is. And the Inspector General Act provides that there is a way to have those discussions about disagreements, to elevate those discussions to the head of the agency and to resolve them if they can be resolved. Ultimately, if the agency head decides that another path forward is better, Congress has oversight of that process and can ask further questions.
Can a congressperson, chairman of a committee, have you fired?
Well, let me answer that in terms of removal of IGs, in terms of what the IG Act provides. The Act provides that the person who appoints the IG has the authority to remove the IG. So in the case of presidentially appointed IGs, for example, I'm one of those, the president has the authority to remove me. In order to do that, he must give Congress 30 days notice prior to a removal being effective. And the purpose of that provision is to give Congress an opportunity to be aware of that proposed action and to engage in whatever dialogue it deems appropriate.
A couple years ago, Neil Barofsky, who was the special inspector general for TARP, was here. And here's what he had to say about the process of IGs, and I want you to put it in perspective from your experience.
When Glenn Fine was the DOJ, the Inspector General of the Department of Justice, he helped use his office to really lead the investigation into the politically motivated firings of U.S. attorneys. I mean, that's an example of an extremely aggressive, very effective IG. Often you don't hear about them, know about them. I was once asked a question about why a particular agency didn't have an IG doing what we were doing, and it turned out that they did. It's just that you never heard of them because they're so not out there. They're so not aggressive. I was once told by an IG point blank that he wished he could do what I was doing, but he was afraid for his job, that he had kids in college and he couldn't afford to lose his job. And that's one of the problems. They live in fear of being fired if they're too aggressive in carrying out their duties.
What do you think?
Well, let me offer a number of comments on that tape. When an IG agrees to take the job of Inspector General, we know that in the case of presidentially appointed Inspectors General, that we serve at the pleasure of the President. That is what the Act provides. All of us understand that the pleasure of the President means precisely that. We believe that if we do a good job, that we should be able to continue serving. My sense, based on my knowledge of my colleagues and my experience in the community, is that Inspectors General, people who take the jobs of Inspectors General, who accept that responsibility, are committed to public service. They are committed to making their agencies work well, and they would not be taking these jobs if they didn't believe that they could make a difference.
Okay, go back to your own situation. You were appointed by George Bush, but did you have any political connection to George Bush?
No, not at all.
Where did you come from to this job?
Well, prior to my position in agriculture, I was serving as the Inspector General of the Small Business Administration, which is another federal agency, And I was appointed by President Clinton to that position, and I had been in that job for about 3 years.
How did you get that job originally?
Well, prior to that appointment, I had been a career executive in the IG's office at SBA and had worked my way up the ranks, got to know how an IG office works, and from a number of perspectives. As you know, my training is as a lawyer.
Where did you get your law degree?
From Vanderbilt University in Tennessee.
And I understand you originally studied Asian studies when you began your education. Where was that, and how do you get from Asian studies to the law?
Well, you're correct. I majored in Asian studies when I was in undergrad at Pomona College in California, and I found that to be a very interesting course of study. I had a tremendous, and still do have a tremendous interest in international affairs, how the global community works, and I think I attribute that to my growing up in Honolulu, which is, as many people say, a melting pot. Honolulu tends to, and does, the state of Hawaii has a very diverse population of people from all around the globe. And so that was kind of a natural development for me.
Where did your family come from originally?
From China, back in the mid-1800s.
Why did they come to Hawaii, or did they come to Hawaii?
Well, they did. They came from China to Hawaii. My grandparents, great-grandparents, came on my father's side to work in the pineapple and sugarcane fields on the plantations, and on my mother's side, my ancestors were shopkeepers, small shopkeepers.
What's your father do?
He is a physician by training and profession.
Mom?
Homemaker.
I read that you have two sisters who are lawyers, and a brother who is a doctor. Tell us about the three of them.
Yeah, I have four. We have a family of 4 kids, as you mentioned. It's very interesting that my brother, who is currently a practicing rheumatologist in San Francisco, went into medicine following my father's footsteps. The daughters of the family, all of us went to law school, and we like to joke that Dad invested in our law degrees so that he would have adequate representation if he ever needed it.
What do your sisters do?
They are both lawyers. My youngest sister is a lawyer with the federal government, and my middle sister is in private practice doing medical malpractice work.
So where does this come from in the family? Where does the impetus to be that educated come from, all 4 kids?
Well, I have to attribute that to my parents. Since day one, they were extremely encouraging of us to pursue our education as far as it would take us, to develop a professional approach to life. And they instilled in us a value that, in addition to being educated, we have a responsibility to help people, to get engaged, to do what we can in our own spheres to move society forward, to help individuals as well.
Your husband works for the government?
He did for a full career. He recently retired.
And he was with the IRS?
That's correct.
Is he a lawyer?
Yes, he is.
So what's the motivation for somebody watching this? We often see politicians, but we don't see government servants very often. What's the motivation to be in government service? First of all, throw into that cynics who say government servants have a great life, great health care, great retirement, make good money, all that, and then put it in context from your standpoint.
Well, you're asking me a question about my choice to go into government service as a career, and I will say from the beginning of my career, I have been in government service, and I have always felt very strongly that the private practice of law is a wonderful profession, and I got a taste of it when I was in law school. I did clerking while I was a law student and had a chance to interact with clients and to see what private practice was all about. And in addition, I had a chance while I was in law school to do internships with the city and state government of Honolulu to see how that kind of profession would work. And I found it personally much more satisfying to be in a situation where I could work on issues that had broad impact, where I could bring my talents, such as they are, to bear on issues that really affect the well-being of many people.
Go back to the agriculture department. You said you had 500 and some people that work for you. How many people work at the agriculture department?
About 100,000 employees, all told.
How much money does agriculture spend every year?
About $100 billion, roughly. I would say currently about 3/4 of that is invested in the SNAP program. The SNAP program is what is popularly known as the food stamp program.
And how often are you worrying about the waste, fraud, and abuse? We hear that 3 words so often in the SNAP program, and how big a deal is it?
Because it is, the SNAP program is the biggest program within agriculture. We have it on our radar screen on a daily basis. And let me just take a step back in terms of how IGs plan, how we plan our work. We have, as I mentioned, responsibilities to audit programs as well as to investigate allegations of wrongdoing. As you can imagine, in a program as big as SNAP, which touches 1 out of 7 Americans, there is always a potential for people to try and take advantage of that to engage in fraud, to perhaps try and obtain payments that they may not be entitled to. And so we constantly, on a regular basis, have allegations of fraud at all levels of that program. And so we are on a daily basis addressing those allegations. In terms of our oversight responsibilities, we plan our audit work, and I think if you talk to any IG, they will tell you this. The key to us in how we plan our work is to take a look at the portfolio of our program, of our agency as a whole, and say, where is the greatest risk to the taxpayer dollar? Clearly, if a program comprises 75% of an agency's portfolio, you've got to take a look at that to see if the dollars are going where they should be going.
I have a press release from the USDA, the Department of Agriculture, from May 24, 2012, and it says, Agriculture Undersecretary Kevin Concanon, is he still there?
He is.
Today announced new measures to further reduce fraud in USDA's Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, as a part of the Obama administration's ongoing campaign to cut waste. What's the campaign to cut waste? And are you a part of that?
As we've been discussing, I think one observation that I would make is that inspectors general, we do not have the monopoly on ensuring that government programs work as effectively as they can. The first line of defense, we like to say, is the agency program official who has responsibility for that program. In this case, Undersecretary Concanon is a very knowledgeable and experienced official in these areas of nutrition programs, and he sees, as well as we do, the potential for fraud on the one hand and the need to make the program run as effectively as possible on the other. And so he has, as you note, rolled out a number of initiatives, some of them in response to IG audits, some of them on his own, to address vulnerabilities in the program. We certainly welcome that. We work very closely with him and his staff to partner on some of these initiatives, and we are constantly engaged in conversation with them as to things that we are seeing, vulnerabilities that we're identifying, and ways that the program people can move forward to address those issues.
If you go back to what Neil Borofsky said, not much evidence of independence on the part of the 73 IGs from his perspective. Fair criticism?
My comment, I have a number of thoughts on that quote. Much of the work that we do as IGs is sensitive. It's sensitive from a number of perspectives. It can involve personal privacy concerns when we're conducting investigations. It can involve recommendations and findings that we are seeing that we want to make sure we understand before we go public. One of the key things for us as inspectors general is that as we do our oversight work and we uncover evidence, we want to continuously test and question that evidence to make sure that we really have the whole story. We have the context, we've got all of the information that relates to it, we're not missing anything, and we understand what the agency's perspective is. And an analogy that I would draw would be when you go to a pond and you see a duck or a swan on the water, they appear to be gliding along, but underneath there's a lot of paddling. And so as IGs, we frequently do not speak publicly about our work until it is at the point where we are confident that we have the right facts, that we have a perspective, and we have recommendations.
Okay, go to the independence thing again. You're sitting at your desk in your office at the Agriculture Department, and you look around and you've got a Secretary of Agriculture, you've got a President of the United States and the White House group, you've got the Congress, you've got the press. How much independence do you have? How about the money that you get every year to function? Who decides how much money you're going to get?
Well, to answer your last question first, the entity that decides how inspectors general are funded, who has the bottom line decision, ultimately is the Congress. And I'm talking from the perspective, say at USDA, we are an appropriated entity, and so we put together a budget request every year. It goes through the normal budget process, through the department, through OMB. The president makes a request on our behalf, but ultimately it is the Congress who decides how much to fund us and for what. And as part of that process, there are hearings. Congress obtains perspectives from many sources, as they would always do, and ultimately Congress makes that decision as to what level of resources is appropriate.
How much money for the next fiscal year beginning October the 1st have you asked for? And I know that we're in the middle of the budgets and all that. How much are you going to get?
Well, if we're talking about the FY14 cycle at this point, the President has sent forward his request for our office, which would provide for a slight increase off of our FY13 levels. Of course, in FY13 we had sequestration, and so that's a complicating factor.
Did it hit you at all?
Yes. Inspectors General have not been held harmless from sequestration. Like any other appropriation account, sequestration applied across the board. In terms of what we are going to receive in our FY14 appropriation, at this stage of the game, I honestly don't know. Both of the appropriations committees have held hearings on the USDA request, and I've had a chance to testify before both the House and Senate Approps committees, and we'll see what they decide.
How often have you testified before Congress?
Oh, a number of times. I have the opportunity to testify every year in the appropriation cycle, and in addition, I would say on average I testify between 4 and 8 times a year on various issues. For example, SNAP, there have been a number of hearings on the SNAP program, hearings on broadband, hearings in my role as the IG Council Chair on issues that affect the IG community.
Speaking of Council Chair, back in 2008, the government authorized the Council
Yes.
of the Inspectors General on Integrity and Efficiency. First, why did you need this? Because I would assume that's what you're doing anyway. And what does it mean, and why are you the first chair on this?
Okay. Well, as you point out, in 2008, Congress statutorily created the Council. Prior to that time, there was no statutorily established entity. Over the years, as the IG community evolved, various presidents had created councils, one council for the presidentially appointed IGs and one for the agency heads. And over the years, we came together as a community to work on issues of common interest. At the time of the 2008 legislation, there was a view that it would make sense first to merge those two councils together so that we would have all IGs together in one council. Secondly, to deal with the issue of providing training to our staffs, which was an ongoing and open issue. And third, to encourage us to work cooperatively as IGs on issues that span agency lines. In addition, the legislation very importantly codified a mechanism for dealing with allegations against us as IGs, which is a very important safeguard.
What does that mean?
Well, as you can imagine, people have said to us over the years, IGs, you're here to deal with allegations of wrongdoing against department employees or against members of the public. What happens when we have a concern that you personally may not have done the right thing? Where do we take those allegations? And so one of the roles of the Council of IGs is that we have an integrity committee that is chartered to look at these allegations, to evaluate them, and to do whatever action is appropriate to investigate and to make recommendations. That committee is headed by the FBI and has done a very fine job of running that program.
Why have there been vacancies at the Defense Department and at the State Department for so long for an Inspector General?
The vacancies at Defense and State have existed for a number of years, and I think all of us would agree that in an ideal world, IG vacancies should be filled as quickly as possible. I think as you think about the presidential appointment process, there are a number of steps along the way to actually successfully appoint someone. Under the statute of the IG Reform Act, the IG Council is responsible for identifying qualified candidates. We then provide those names to the White House, Presidential Personnel Office, which is responsible for identifying and nominating a candidate. And ultimately, the candidate goes through the confirmation process. For Inspectors General, that confirmation process involves both the Oversight Committee as well as the Government Affairs Oversight Committee. So it's a dual committee process. So there are numerous points along the way where people need to have input, the process needs to run, and things, can derail a nomination.
Have you read the Inspector General Handbook by Joseph Smits, who used to be the Inspector General at the Department of Defense?
I'm familiar with its existence, but I have not read it.
Well, the Act of 78 is in here, and I just want to read a paragraph talking about this independence thing. And it's under complaints by employers, disclosure of identity, and reprisals. And this is paragraph B under, I guess section 7. There's a lot in here that a layman can't understand. But this seems to be something that you could give us an answer on. The Inspector General, this is the Defense Department only, the Inspector General shall not, after receipt of a complaint or information from an employee, I assume that's a whistleblower,
Could be.
Disclose the identity of the employee without the consent of the employee, unless the Inspector General determines such disclosure is unavoidable during the course of the investigation. How much comfort does that give somebody who wants to complain about waste, fraud, and abuse, that if the Inspector General decides he or she wants to out somebody who's a whistleblower, they can?
The subject of whistleblowers is a very important and sensitive subject. We as IGs depend on whistleblowers. We value their information. It's very important that they feel comfortable coming forward and saying, I have information that you need to have, and my identity, I'm very concerned about potential reprisal. You need to protect my identity. We understand that the statute requires us to extend protections. In practice, what we as IGs will do is to advise whistleblowers of these protections, to say, to the extent that you can give us specific information, that is much more helpful to us than general information. And sometimes in the course of providing specific information and details, it may be that an educated and informed person may be able to guess as to the identity of the whistleblower, and you need to be aware of that risk. And secondly, if we move forward based on your information and we find that in fact there is cause to perhaps take this to prosecution or to administrative action, we need to tell you that at some point your identity may need to be disclosed. We as IGs want to be very upfront with our whistleblowers so that they understand as they get involved in the process what protections are available to them and at what stage those protections kick in.
Later on in paragraph 8, this is another facet of this business, but it says here, the Secretary of Defense may prohibit the Inspector General from initiating, carrying out, or completing any audit or investigation, or from issuing any subpoena after the Inspector General has decided to initiate, carry out, or complete such audit or investigation, or to issue such subpoena if the Secretary determines that such prohibition is necessary to preserve the national security interests of the United States. It compounds this. They don't have an Inspector General at the Secretary, at the Defense Department. They have an acting, and the Secretary can pull the rug out from under the Inspector General anytime they want to. Why should we as citizens feel comfortable that we're being protected, and why don't they give Inspectors General more independence?
Let me offer a few comments on that. As you point out, that language comes from the section of the law that deals with the Defense Inspector General. That is an unusual provision in the sense that of the 73 IGs in the community, my understanding is only a handful of IGs have that kind of restrictive language. For 90% of the IGs, there is no language that allows an agency head to interfere with an IG audit or investigation. For example, at Agriculture, the Secretary of Agriculture does not have the authority to tell me to either start or stop. So for 90% of the agencies, that is true. I believe the exemptions are for the Inspectors General in agencies that have particular concerns with respect to national security, for example, the CIA, the Defense Department. And when Congress wrote that language, it was an attempt to balance the need and importance of an IG being able to initiate and run investigations against the need of the administration to manage its activities. Now, I think in practice, and I don't want to speak for the Defense IG or the CIA IG or any of the other IGs, but my understanding is that in practice, if an IG believes that it is critical to manage to run a job, to do an audit, to do an investigation, that they have a very persuasive argument to go ahead and initiate that, keeping in mind the statutory language.
Has there ever been a day that you sat at your desk and said, I don't have enough independence?
Personally, no. I have been fortunate as an IG to have worked with agency heads who really understood the value of an independent voice within the agency. It may not always have been comfortable, and the message that perhaps our audits and investigations bring have not always been perhaps completely agreed with by the administration, but I have never personally experienced interference.
I want to show some video of Congresswoman Jackie Spear from California, a Democrat, just in a little bit in a committee talking about the IG.
I don't know what we can do as a committee, but I think it's a waste of taxpayer funds if all of these recommendations that are being made and the potential savings that are suggested in the $87 billion range, if we can't force these departments to take the actions that the Inspector Generals suggest.
Yes. What do you think?
That comment, I believe, came from a hearing recently, within the last year or so. And it encapsulates, I think, another perhaps perception on the part of the public that inspectors general, when we do an audit or an investigation, that once we have a finding and recommendations, that we then are authorized to go in and take that action, that we can make the program change, we can take a personnel action, we can prosecute. And in fact, the Inspector General Act does not give us that authority. We have what I would call the power of the pen, persuasion, logic. We can surface issues and make recommendations, but ultimately, the CIGIE Act says we do not have the authority to run programs, to implement recommendations. And so, as the Congresswoman points out, Congress plays a very critical role in terms of providing oversight to agencies, in terms of asking agencies, what are you doing with respect to these recommendations that the Inspector General has made? Do you agree with them? Are you moving ahead with them? What are your thoughts on that? And that's a very critical role.
Would we know about the IRS selective decisions on who gets tax-free foundations without this man, who is the Inspector General, IRS and Treasury, and outed all this?
Our report included 3 key findings. First, that the Internal Revenue Service used inappropriate criteria that identified for review organizations applying for tax-exempt status based upon their names or policy positions rather than on tax-exempt law and Treasury regulations. Second, that the cases that the IRS referred for review as potential political cases experienced delays. And third, the IRS made unnecessary and burdensome requests for information.
Do you know the man, and is he a part of your group?
Yes, the Inspector General who's testifying is Russell George. He's the Inspector General for the IRS. TIGTA is what it's commonly known as. He is one of the 73 federal IGs. He is part of the IG Council.
Was he appointed by the President?
He was appointed by the President, yes, and confirmed by the Senate.
And so how important was he in this process? Would we have known what was going on at the IRS if he hadn't been in the mix?
My understanding of this situation, based on just reading newspaper reports and watching film, is that, and I could be wrong on this, my understanding is that his office was requested to do this audit by a member of Congress, and his office has been engaged in that work for a period of time, and he was testifying on the findings of his report. Obviously, his findings are of great interest to all of us. As a taxpayer, I'm not sure that I would have been aware of that work or those issues without the IG's report.
Let me show you on the screen some of the vacancies so the public can know. State Department, at the time we're recording this, 2,051 days. I understand somebody's been nominated for that job, but not confirmed.
Yes. Recently, my understanding is, and the White House has nominated candidates for the State Department, the Labor Department. In addition, the Defense Department has a nominee, and AID, the Agency for International Development, has a nominee.
But look at the number of days it's been. I mean, should the public be suspicious of what's going on here? I don't know what that means. It's just why in the world would you have an operation like the Defense Department or even the State Department, where you've got, and the USAID, all this money going out, and where there's been fraud, waste, and abuse, and there's nobody there in the Inspector General?
You know, the chart that you've just put up, it shows that these positions have been vacant for years, in some cases 5 or 6 years, and these are major cabinet level offices. And of course, in the best of all possible worlds, we would have a confirmed IG as soon as possible in those jobs. I will say that in the absence of a confirmed IG, the public should take comfort in knowing that the work of the office does continue. There are career executives in those offices, very accomplished audit executives, investigative executives, and managers, and the ongoing day-to-day work of audit and investigation continues even though there may not be a confirmed IG.
IGNet.gov.
Yes.
Can anybody get on this website?
Yes, IGNet.gov is a public website.
And what would be the advantage of the public getting on the website? Can they learn anything?
Well, we have developed this website, and the purpose of it is to provide the public with information about the council itself and what we do, and to also provide links to the websites of our individual 73 IG members, so that if, for example, you are curious about what the HHS IG is doing in the area of Medicare, or what the Social Security IG is doing with respect to Social Security fraud, you could log onto our website, find a link to those individual IG websites, go there, read their latest audit and investigative reports, look at their management challenges list, and get a real sense of what the major challenges are facing those agencies and those IGs.
Have you ever totaled up the total number of people that work for IGs in the 73 different offices, and how much money the federal government pays a year, or taxpayers pay a year, to have this investigating units?
And you raise a very good point. On IGNet as well is the report of the IG Council, which we put together every year, and it accumulates those kinds of statistics so that if you as a member of the public want to know, as a taxpayer, how much am I investing in this? How many people are involved in IG work, and what's the return on investment? We do have that information available. My recollection for FY 2012, which is the most recent report, is that there are about 12,000 employees government-wide doing IG work, 73 IG offices, return on investment of about $17 for every dollar that's invested.
What does that mean?
Well, what that means is that for every dollar that Congress appropriates to IGs to fund staff, travel, investigations, audits, and oversight, we as IGs make recommendations with respect to improper payments, recoveries, criminal fines of about $17 for every dollar invested.
There is a site on Wikipedia that is headed up, and again, I know this is not your personal responsibility, but please see if you can help us understand this. It's under the heading Iraq War Misappropriations. I'm going to read the first paragraph. Iraq War misappropriations refers to allegations that billions of dollars have not been properly accounted for or misappropriated during the Iraq War funds from funds released by the United States Congress for programs including the reconstruction and rebuilding of Iraq after the war. And we've covered Stuart Bowen for years here in committee as the CIGIE, or the Special Inspector General for Iraq and Afghanistan. Here's the line I want you to explain. Gag orders, now this is Wikipedia, gag orders from the United States Department of Justice / White House are preventing further inquiry into the allegations. I mean, how much, if you're in the public again watching the billions of dollars that have been reported lost in the war over there, but nobody knows, they just vanished. And then you see gag orders, is that accurate, do you think? And I know that, again, this is not your personal responsibility.
Yeah, without commenting on Wikipedia and the source of those comments, I have not heard that particular comment or characterization. I can talk generally about IG work. You mentioned that the Department of Justice is quoted as implementing those gag orders. Just as context, as an IG, when I do work involving perhaps misappropriation of funds or embezzlement or any kind of fraud in a program, and if we find during the course of that investigation that there's evidence that supports that kind of a finding of fraud, the first thing that we do is we consult with the Justice Department, the U.S. attorneys around the country, the prosecutors, and we say, this is the evidence we're finding. do you think this is of prosecutive interest? Is there a way to move this forward? Do you have an interest in it? Do you think it will succeed? Once a prosecutor determines that they want to take that on, the Justice Department then has its normal protocols for working those cases. And because of the criminal justice system, which can involve grand juries, can involve indictments, can involve confidential informants, and I'm just talking very generally here, can involve the use of sensitive investigative techniques that perhaps are not things that the investigative or law enforcement or prosecutive community thinks would be appropriate for general knowledge at a preliminary stage. There may very well be a request from a prosecutor to work very carefully until such time as it's appropriate for public information, an indictment stage where things become public. Now, I don't know the specifics of this situation, but I'm just offering some comments on context.
This is a leading question. Would we be better off as a country, and would the taxpayer be better off if the IGs in the government had the same kind of independence that the Supreme Court does?
That's a very interesting question.
Where you really have independence, and your department head can't work to get rid of you if the Congress is on the same side as the department head, that the president can't work to get rid of you, that you can't be sandbagged inside, that whistleblowers have a real independence. With a $17 trillion debt, and this so-called, I've been reading waste, fraud, and abuse. Everybody in Congress says that, everybody in the IG offices say it, waste, fraud, and abuse. We're going to get rid of that. But here we are with billions that go lost.
Well, I think the whole issue of IG independence has certainly been the crux of the debate. There will be some who say that we have too much independence. There will be some who say we don't have enough. My experience within the community is that on occasion there are situations where an IG is perhaps not granted access to documents in a way that they should be. There may be situations where an agency head doesn't fully understand the independence of an IG, and so that relationship may not work as well as it should. And I think there have been headlines in the past about situations like that. So clearly there are, on occasion, situations that need to be dealt with. But by and large, and I think we need to continue working on those issues, by and large, I think most IGs would say that most of the time we have the ability to do the work we believe needs to be done, to make the recommendations we believe need to be made. And at the end of the day, that we believe we are fulfilling our mission in the taxpayer's interest.
I want to go back to the interview with Neil Barofsky, because at one point he talks about, as he started his office inside the Treasury Department, that he hired a woman from CIGIE, from Stuart Bowen's office, who was the PR person, to come over and be his PR person. I just want you 45 seconds of watching him explain that and tell us how important this kind of thing could be for somebody even like you.
And the first thing she said to me was, "I'm not going to lie for you." I was like, "I never asked you to lie for me." And I asked her what she was talking about, and she really explained how the press works and how she believed it was very important for this agency, as a new agency, to be completely upfront with the media, to never spin, never do a lot of the tactics that a lot of agencies do, which is off the record or on background, which means telling the press something but not putting your name behind it, which is one of the great tactics in this town, is that people will say, because you could say anything when your name's not attached to it. You can lie, you can make things up, you can exaggerate. And she was basically saying that we're not going to play any of the, if I were to hire her, we're not going to play any of those games.
Do you have a press person?
Let me offer some comments on that. I have a person in my office, one of our lawyers, who handles our work, information work, both with the Congress and with media. We get a lot of inquiries from the press about the audits that we issue. And so we do have someone who handles those issues for us.
What did you think of what he said?
Well, I'll talk about my experience at USDA. We run what I consider to be a very transparent operation. It is our view that we fulfill our role most responsibly when we keep Congress informed of what we're doing, when we respond with accurate information to the media, and when we keep in mind our responsibilities to both the administration and to Congress. We understand that credibility is our biggest asset, and once we lose our credibility, our reputation goes down the tubes. That credibility is based on quality in our reports and on accuracy in our communications. And so we do our very best to provide complete, accurate, non-misleading information.
Neil Borofsky, early in the program, threw a Valentine to Glenn Fine, who's no longer at Justice as the IG, and was appointed originally by Bill Clinton, I believe, and then came in during the Bush administration. But he was the one responsible for creating that huge controversy over U.S. attorneys around the country that was fought by the White House. It's complicated, but it was, and Karl Rove was one of the most outspoken critics of what Glenn Fine was doing. I just want to show you 15 seconds of what Glenn Fine said on this network about what an IG does.
We don't simply look at what happened wrong, but we also try and use that as a mechanism for improving the operations. So I find it to be a satisfying and challenging job, and I believe that we can have a positive impact on the way our government works.
Would we be better off when it comes to politics if a Democrat was the IG in a Republican administration and vice versa?
Well, that's a very interesting question. As you know, we as IGs are appointed without regard to political affiliation. That is one of the statute's requirements. And so we like to do our work without regard to the political consequences or the political interests involved. Now, that's not to say that we are not aware that the work that we do may have different perspectives when people hear our work. And so I think many of us who've been IGs for a long time have worked in situations where we have worked both for Republican and Democratic administrations. We may have been appointed by a Republican or a Democratic president. And of course, our oversight committees can be controlled at any given time by Republicans or Democrats, and that can change. And so we, comfortable may not be the exact word, but we are experienced at dealing with different political perspectives in terms of how people react to our work. The bottom line is that what we do has to be based on facts, evidence, and objectivity. And the users of our products can then take it and make whatever policy decisions they need to make.
There's an operation called the Project on Government Oversight investigation on the State Department IG position. Here's Jake Wiens. Just this is about 30 seconds. And again, we've talked about this, but let's put this in perspective.
The State Department IG has now been vacant for 1,576 days, which is over 4 years. The position first became vacant when State's most recent permanent IG, Howard Krongard, resigned amid allegations that he had been blocking criminal investigations into contractors operating in Iraq. The initiation of that vacancy created an opportunity to fill that position with a highly qualified and well-respected permanent IG who could restore credibility to that IG office. But that opportunity has not been realized, as the position has remained vacant without a nominee since the last year of the Bush administration.
What recommendation would you have or your counsel have to take the appointment of IGs out of politics? Is it possible?
Well, that's a very good question about appointment of IGs. As we've been discussing, half of the IGs are appointed by their agency heads. Those would be the smaller, actually not all of them are smaller, some of them are quite large.
Is that good or bad?
Well, I think, you could look at that from both perspectives. On the good side, so to speak, it avoids the confirmation process, the lengthy process that it takes for a presidential appointment and confirmation. On the other hand, agency heads who have the authority to appoint their IGs also have the authority to remove their IGs, and so it's a much more direct relationship. That can be both good and bad. In terms of the appointment of an IG, I think greater legal minds than mine have probably suggested that we take a look at the Constitution and how that might have an impact. Since IGs are considered officers of the executive branch, that probably needs to be factored in.
You know, one of the things on your website, the council's website, is training program descriptions. And I gather that of the 12,000 employees of all the different IGs, that they can take these training courses. I just wanted to ask you about one. We're about out of time. There's a whole list of them here. This one, by the way, costs $495 tuition. Who's that tuition go to? Where does that go? If you're taking a course that your training programs?
The tuition goes to the IG Academy, the Training Institute.
Is that independent of the government?
No, actually the Training Institute is part of the IG Council. It's under the IG Council, we have two major missions. One is to do cross-cutting studies and the other is to train our staff. So we have a Training Institute, very well-run institute that offers courses in auditing, investigations, and inspection and evaluation. The tuition is designed to pay for the cost of instructors and any facilities rental that we may have to do.
What's the budget for the council for a year?
$7 million.
How many people work there?
Currently, we have in Washington about 8 employees. We have a few more employees down in Glencoe, which is a law enforcement training institute location, to run the investigative academy.
I just want to read you this one. Critical thinking skills. This 3-day training program introduces concepts such as the elements of reasoning, Socratic questioning, and identifying logical fallacies. Socratic questioning. Where did that come from?
Socratic questioning, it takes me back to my days in law school, which the Socratic method, as you may be familiar, in law school, those of us who've seen movies about training there, it's the professors, the way that a professor imparts learning is to question and then question and then question again a student's answers to get to the nub of the issue.
There's another course, by the way. This one's only $150, and it's a 1-day training course under something called CIGIE. I assume that's CIGIE.
That is CIGIE.
And here it is, the importance of IG independence and what it means in practice and the challenges and opportunities. And OIG, an Office of Inspector General, dual reporting role presents in conducting oversight. Can you break that down? We only have 60 seconds.
Okay. That course was developed in response to great interest in the IG community and a need to provide a common understanding among our staffs about the kinds of issues you and I have been talking about today. What does the statute provide in terms of independence? How does that actually work in practice? What does the statute mean when it talks about responsibilities to Congress as well as the administration? How do we carry that out? And we have found that that course is a very useful course for auditors, investigators, attorneys, everyone in the community, as well as new IGs.
By the way, we're out of time, and I have to end by asking you how it is that you've been in government all this time and never done a television interview.
I was waiting for the right opportunity, so thank you for that, for providing this to me.
Phyllis Fong has been our guest. She is the Inspector General at the United States Agriculture Department and also the chair of the Council of Inspectors General on Integrity and Efficiency. Time's up, and we thank you.
Thank you.
For a DVD copy of this program, call 1-877-662-7726. For free transcripts or to give us your comments about this program, visit us at Q&A.org. Q&A programs are also available as C-SPAN podcasts.